Hey everybody, it's noon Pacific and it's Monday. That means it's content chat time. I'm your host, Erika Heald, today with a furry little intern, Kupo the baby, Kupo the Frenchie right here. So apologies in advance if you don't like snoring. You might have to hear some anyway, but it's not because we won't be having an amazing conversation. And I know that to be the case because my guest is Maureen Jann, who is not just my friend, she is a badass marketing genius, and she is going to be sharing all sorts of inspiration today to help us all get out of our little boxes and our comfort zones and find new sources of inspiration for our content marketing. So, welcome to Content Chat, Maureen. It's nice to see you on video.
I know, it's nice to be here. I'm super excited to talk about nerdy fun and content and get into it with you. I always love hanging out with you, so I feel like I win, you know.
Same. So, for folks who haven't met you before, why don't you just give a brief intro for yourself of who you are, what you do, and what you're looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Maureen Jann. I've been a marketer for about 25 years. I have my bread and butter has typically been building marketing departments from the ground up. Recently, I owned a marketing agency for about 5 years and went back into the rat race for a while, which was a fun and interesting experience. And then it turns out it was time to go back to freelancing. So I'm doing contract fractional marketing work for organizations in the training and development space. I'm also doing some thought leadership development for a couple of CEOs and doing some really exciting work for a couple of website strategies. So lots of good, fun stuff. I love the flexibility, and I'm really enjoying getting to work with all these unique businesses. So I'm really excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited that this means that you have the ability to own your schedule so you can be here with us. So, hooray!
Yes, I do.
So, before we get into the how, let's start with the why. Why should content marketing teams take risks with new or innovative content ideas? Why shouldn't people just be happy with the status quo where they don't have to ask permission, beg forgiveness, or make a business case?
I mean, let's be honest, boring content is boring, right? I mean, are we all just sick to death of what's happening out there? I mean, if you see one more white paper, are you going to be delighted? No, you're going to be, look, there's another white
Bored.
paper, right? Right. So boring content is boring. And I think that what we really need to do is start, if we as consumers are no longer contented with just the everyday, yes, sure, fine, why not status quo. That doesn't, it's not going to serve us. It's not going to get us noticed as content marketers. And honestly, it sucks to do as a content marketer. We're all bored to death of doing it. So if you have this opportunity where you can sit there and say, how can I make myself more remarkable, or how can I make my brand more memorable? You're not going to be doing it through white papers. You're just not, unless it's like, a singing, dancing white paper. I mean, if you can make that happen, I'm here for it. But I think that falls into a novelty category. I think it's really important to think about that. And then also the reality is like there might be formats you've tried prior that didn't work, but the consumers are changing, the market is changing, and the technology is changing. And we're able to like do some more interesting things. And it's time to look at that and reevaluate whether or not it makes sense to do the same things we were doing before, or if it's time to experiment. So I think the taking risk part is really challenging because it puts you, sort of in the eyes of your leadership team. But on the other hand, so does winning. So does getting the good business, right? That also puts you right in front of the, right in front of your customers, and actually puts you in front of your leadership in a good way, right? Because you're starting to generate content that's driving dollar signs, and that's what we're all looking for in the first place.
So I have to share this comment from Anne, which is I've never come across a white paper that I thought, wow, this is an amazing piece of content. Um,
No, that's never a thing. No, you're
it's
like,
sad
like,
because it should be amazing, but it's really hard.
it
It
is.
frequently it's frequently people who are writing the white papers don't even have the background they need or the access to the people they need to talk to create a white paper that would give you the like wow. And people have this idea that there's certain things that are just good enough for being business related marketing, but the thing is that if people are spending 3 or 4 hours on their mobile devices every day, that's where you're going to hit them, and they're going to not just be looking at work related content because it's work related time. They're going to be looking at whatever is on their phone or their tablet. They don't differentiate anymore. There isn't that line in the sand between, oh, I am looking at my business things on Instagram right now, or I'm looking, on wherever for things that are just work related. You're competing now with everything. You're competing with videos of my dog here. And you're competing with, TikTok dancing, singing, dancing things all
Yeah.
over the place. So I think that's just such a good reminder is that there's limited attention and
Yeah,
you've got to be able to
absolutely.
capture it by being interesting.
So true. And yes, and white papers are still a thing. This is it's painful to say, but also very true. Yeah, we have to do better. We have to do something different. We can't, if we look at the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, right? And we want different results. We want to get better. We want to serve the organizations we're working with better. And the best way to do that is to continue to drive like foundationally novelty, right? Because you need to, especially depending on your market, if you have a research oriented audience, you might be able to get away with a white paper, but you better make sure that that white paper doesn't suck and that it's well researched
It's
and
got to
that
be
it is
juicy.
insights.
Yeah, it's got to be juicy
Yeah.
and full of real insights and things that are going to make somebody's life better.
Yeah.
It can't just be regurgitation of the same uncited statistics that everybody's been using all over the place and then
Yeah.
a not so thinly veiled pitch for your product. Everyone is so over that.
Yeah. And I think that you have actually said this way with it's WF.
With them.
Yeah.
Yep.
With them. There we go. That's one of your
What's
favorite.
in
And
it for me?
right. Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's key. If you are not seriously steeped in that customer perspective, like you are legitimately wasting your time and energy and money, and we can't afford that. Like we all know that we're running lean from a marketing department standpoint. We're running lean as contractors. I mean, the the layoffs are going like crazy still. We're still
Yep,
seeing that happen all over the market. So, you're lean. Why are you investing in the same old crap that gets you mediocre results?
totally. And to your point, we need to be thinking about our customers and what they need. So,
Right.
what are some of the ways that content marketing teams can really, tap into their customer or community insights to, generate some of these kinds of innovative ideas and go new places with their content?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the nut of it here, like the most basic, least complicated answer to this question is go talk to them.
But I always
Like
hate that because I remember, working places where, that was like, how can I go talk to them? I'm never allowed to talk to a customer.
yeah, I
In a
have, I
good
have some
company.
foundational frustrations with that as it is. Like, first of all, we're not actually wild animals, and we promise we won't actually insult your customers just by talking to them. Like, hey, sales teams, hey, it's us. We're your marketers, and we just want to help you. So just if any salespeople are out there listening, please know that we respect your customers and we'll listen to you if you have boundaries with them. But and if it fails that you cannot sit down and actually just straight up talk to your customers, have your sales team record their conversations and listen to them. Go dig into those, right? Understand what's happening in their world, in their market. I mean, you're going to get a very strong sales perspective. So it's better if you can have a little space to ask a few follow-up questions that are marketing specific, but it's better than nothing. That's for sure. Um, and in lieu of that, like in addition to that, being able to actually talk to your customers, I think a lot of the things that you can do to drive customers' insights is ask them in a different way, right? So we can look at LinkedIn polls are a great way to do it. You can, if you want to try some original research, I mean, it's tricky to do like true scientific level research, but I think that anecdotal or more casual polls are completely valuable and can be used to take the pulse of what's going on in your market. I wouldn't cite them, with like scientific citations, but I would certainly like use them as a way to have a conversation or start a conversation around a particular topic, to sort of deepen that conversation. So let's say you're doing a LinkedIn poll or you're doing a Twitter poll. It depends on Twitter, X, whatever. Um, just the social media poll in general is a pretty good way to sort of get a pulse on how people feel about a topic. Um, I also use quizzes as a way to sort of get deeper insights, but quizzes are a little trickier, and we can talk a little bit more about this later. But just you have to make it worth their while to actually take it, and so.
Yeah,
But I definitely want to talk about that more later, so I don't want to
we
let the
definitely
cat out of
will.
the bag.
We definitely
Yeah,
will.
and then the other thing is like interactive content. There's some technologies out right now where you can actually, if you do have a PDF, which could be seemingly boring on the surface, but allows you to interact with the content. There's a couple of Uber. Mm,
Uberflip.
Yes, thank you. Uberflip, what a great opportunity for you to actually learn from your customers' behavior within your existing content and use that as a starting point for those additional conversations. So I think it's worthwhile to like invest in the kinds of technologies that allow you to understand better what your customers are doing and how they're interacting with your content as it is. And how can you use that to sort of double click into it and extrapolate more information and build out new pieces of content that are more interesting.
Totally. The only thing I would add to that is I'm a huge fan of always doing, community or membership surveys and readership surveys
Mhm.
where you ask, where people are getting their information and who they trust and whose opinion matters to them. Because once you know all of that, you're going to make better decisions about your own content marketing. And if you have an executive team that doesn't want you to ask those kinds of questions to your customers, then you really need to have a conversation about what they're trying to do with their content marketing. Because if it's not putting the customers and their needs at the core, then maybe they're just asking you to do marketing content and not content marketing. And that's a conversation for a completely different day. But I think it's something you do need to understand because definitions are really important.
I love that. I love that definition. I love the idea of content marketing versus marketing, or content for marketing. Ooh, I love that. That's really smart. Yeah, and sometimes when I talk about what I do, it's about creating pathways and deeper understanding about why a product is a good fit for a consumer versus creating brochures. They're different. Those are definitely different things, right?
Yes. And we just had a question from Wendy Kramer, and she wanted to know if you had any examples of some of the interactive content. And with PDFs, she's thinking workbooks, but were there some other examples that you've come across?
Yeah, there was a technology out for a little while. I'm actually going to see if I can grab it real quick. But there was a technology out for a little while that was interactive, and that you can sort of, as you go through, as a sort of a choose your own adventure vibe, where it generated custom. So it was like a ask a question. It would give you like a brief synopsis of like an answer in a short video, and then you go to the next section, ask another question, and ultimately at the end of this you would get a strategy. And I'm trying to remember what exactly the name of that was, so I'm going to go dig it up real quick. But I had a couple of examples that I used and I just loved them, and they were super smart, interesting. I'm not sure if they're still doing it. I may have to follow up with folks after this call to talk about it, but
We can add it
I
to the
think
recap.
yeah, Uber Flip's a good example of being able to gain insights through through the interactions within a PDF, and the PDFs with workbooks. Yeah, I think that would be a good conversation to have in that the follow up for sure.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So, kind of, digging in a little bit to what we're talking about, what are some of the tools that are useful to help content marketers source new content ideas? Because after you've had some of these conversations and gotten
Yeah.
some context about things people are interested in, how do you actually though figure out what are the right things to create that are going to be differentiated and not just more noise and more clutter.
So I like to use a combination of nonsense, like real silliness, with an understanding of the market and data. So I think data tools like SEO tools, understanding what people are searching for, building out strategies that surround both from a keyword perspective as well as like the topic cluster perspective. Being able to really understand like the very analytical side of things and making sure that it's grounded in like strong analytics, and intersect that with something fun, like generate some ideas that are like absolute nonsense, silly, fun, interesting. I use a lot of things around like what do people foundationally enjoy? Almost everybody likes to color. Like what happens if you intersect coloring with your SEO terms? What happens if you talk about people's favorite food with SEO terms? Like what does that look like? And then to combine that with sort of trends in industry and market experiences where you have a sense for what people are talking about. Like I think about artificial intelligence, but how can you do it in a new way? How can you talk about it in a new way? You could take your SEO terms and your silly idea and your big market trend and put it into chat GPT and see what it comes up with, right? I mean, these are the kinds of tools that you can use. And when I think about the types of ideas that you can come up with, the real innovation is the intersection between things that don't necessarily feel like they go together, right? It's when you can combine unexpected things, um, concepts, ideas, data, content, ideas, data, etc., and you can intersect them in a way that creates value for a user. And sometimes that value looks like entertainment, right? Sometimes that value looks like questions answered in a novel way. Sometimes that question, is answered in a way that I just feel like there's a lot of different opportunities for us to intersect more exciting things using the tools that we're given today, from SEO tools to artificial intelligence to, understanding what people are excited about out in the market using Google Trends or something along the lines of that, and finding ways to really like double click on the opportunity of novelty within our markets and the products we're trying to sell.
I love all of that. I also think you can find really good ideas by looking at the search terms people use on your website. I feel like that is just like too infrequently mined for great
Yeah.
content ideas, because that shows you, what people who are on your site because they were driven there by, either a recommendation, a search engine, or a social link. They're like, I bet these folks would know about this topic, and they searched for it and they didn't find it. So that, tells you right there that those are things that you should consider doing. And sometimes they're quite creative. I've been, really pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and I think there's another variation on that theme. Like if you have the post-purchase survey and you have an open content box, that also has some really juicy opportunities. I'm working with a client right now who, after you take a course, they have a survey, and the comments on there are just pure gold. So useful, not only from a customer testimonials perspective, but just learning where people's frustrations lie and where their questions are still after taking consuming the product, that kind of thing. What a great way to sort of deep dive into, what's next, or at post experience thoughts and things like that.
And it's funny because so often you'll find that leaders are reluctant to have those, open comment fields, because, what we won't get, quantitative results from this. It's like that's the entire point of having a text box, is to get something with the quality that isn't just validating what we think or the options that we think. It's giving people a chance to let their voice be heard. And you learn
Yep.
so much by just giving people that opportunity to talk to you.
I think that actually brings up a super important point about leadership and risk when it comes to creative content. we are going to foundationally struggle with trying new things as long as our leadership is deeply risk averse.
Yeah.
And and the best thing that we can do is try new things in order to see what works and what creates better results for us. And I think that's something that I get frustrated about when we talk about innovative or interesting or creative content. Is just that we really see that a lot of that creativity is stymied by fear, right? And we have so I think when you think about that and you want to look at, like, there are things that are working for an organization, but if you are not trying new things, you're dying, you're falling behind, right? So
Yeah.
it's important to do like a 60-40 perspective or a 75-25. You want to make sure that you continue to grow and change and experiment, because you don't want to fall into that rut just purely because your leadership is avoidant to put a content box on a post, purchase survey. So,
So I
oh,
think we've given a lot of, a lot of possibilities, but talk to me, like, if you were starting a project today, what is your process? Like, what would the activities be that you would go through when you are working on, like, putting together a content calendar for a company? Like, where would you get started?
yeah. So I think that the I do a lot of spreadsheet work, even though it doesn't feel very creative. Like having that kind of structure really helps me build in creative process within the boundaries of what's important. So, for instance, I'll do like a boring old spreadsheet, nothing exciting, where I'll do the personas across the top and and the key value propositions along the bottom, and I'll start doing like, this idea for this, this persona, this idea for this persona, and just kind of go through that process. But it can't stop there, because then you're just creating SEO content, or you're just creating
Right.
content, right? Like, it's just content, and nobody cares. I think the real magic comes in when you start when you start really understanding your audience. I think that the mark of really understanding your market, your audience and your market, is when you know when they think it's funny. That's like, it's a
Yeah.
nuance, right? It's such a subtle nuance. And if you really get your people, you can be funny, and 80% of them will be like, nailed it, right? And that 20% are probably not your ideal market, which is okay. But to be able to really understand your customers well enough to understand what they find humorous, is where I think you can really get into the hearts and minds of customers through content. So, for instance, let's say my market is for a retail salesperson, and they want to do, like, there's a sexual harassment training they have to do, but they have to do it themselves, right? So there's more of a consumer side, a moment where, so how do you find a way to sell them a sexual harassment training that they don't want to do,
Right.
they have to do in order to keep their job. They have to pay for it themselves, even if it's nominal. It's sort of insult to injury, right? So, what if you have to go through this process? How do you get into the hearts and minds of those folks in a way that's meaningful? I find that using humor works really well for me. And if you could be like, we know you don't want to take this, but it might be, but we're your best option, kind of a thing. And so, just really getting into the hearts and minds of people through basically humor and human connection, more importantly than humor, right? It's getting to understand them well enough where you can make them smile, or you can make them sad, or you can be empathetic and they understand that that's actually what's happening here. And so using those spreadsheets to create structure, and then applying, what does this look like if it's funny? What does it look like if it's, sympathetic? What does it look like if it's uh, you know smart or clever? Or you can just try a variety of voices, and you can try a different variety of approaches, and then say, okay, now how would that be delivered, in a way that would be received really, really well? So for instance, we did a couple of years with, for my agency, who Wendy, who was on this chat, we did this really fun program where it would guess what kind of marketer you were via a quiz. It was like a 14 point quiz. And you would go on there and answer your 14 questions, and we would predict what kind of marketer you were. And we delivered it as if it was a horoscope, right? So like of the zodiac sign. So we'd assign you a zodiac sign, and then we'd send you customized horoscopes. And it was, and marketers love that because it basically, it preys on this idea that they don't think you're going to get them, and that nobody understands them as well as they understand themselves. But we're marketers too. So we need to just show them in a really valuable way that we get it and that we've been there. And then proceed to like continue to engage and entertain them in a way that was customized to them and felt very personal, while also leveraging this paradigm that they were already aware of. Like the zodiac signs are ubiquitous. Everybody really knows who that is, at least.
But how do you source ideas like that? Like, how do you come up with the idea for doing that? Like, how did that happen for you guys?
We're silly. We're just silly. We're just like silly. We were like, this is what I mean. Like you come with the structure and then you start spitballing. What would this look like if this was funny? What would this look like if it was just clever? What would it look like if we're leveraging the idea that people were superstitious, or that they're they were suspicious,
Or that people love doing a Cosmo quiz?
Right. What does this look like if we just wanted to, tickle their fancy? I mean, that quiz still gets 20 to 25 people a month taking it. It's people love the idea that they don't believe, marketers in particular don't
And
believe.
we'll make sure that Alec gets the URL for that from you, so that way we can include it in the recap, because I know we're already seeing some comments here. Folks want this quiz.
Yeah, it's really fun. So it's just, it's about getting out of what is already acceptable and getting into silly, like getting into unexpected, getting in surprising. Like ask yourself what this campaign could look like if it is surprising. What would it look like if you appealed to their humor or their heart, or and it's really just surrounding this concept of, instead of focusing on the fear-based side of it, the joy-based side of it. Like how do you create genuine human connection through your marketing? It's not going to be through a generic white paper. I can just guarantee you that's not a thing. That's not how you're going to connect with people. It's not how you're going to build community. It's not how you're going to build loyalty. It's just not.
Totally. So that said, I mean, clearly, quizzes are a vastly underutilized content format. But what are some other content formats you think that more content marketing teams should explore, that they just aren't doing, or that maybe they think they're too hard to do? Because I think we hear that a lot. We have no budget. We don't have an internal agency. These things are too hard.
Yeah, it's a good question. And honestly, like, I think newer content types are just a combination of old content types and new formats, right? So like if you're looking at online interactive ebooks where you're able to provide multimedia like video and tiny polls within the context of a larger story, that's a great way to go, with the easy click and go download that you can use as a proof point for another conversation that you're having. That's a great way to go. Video by itself, I mean, I know we've been talking about this for years and years and years, but people are still struggling with producing videos. And honestly, like if you can generate content that's useful or entertaining, you're going to be in good shape. And once again, if you can get in the heads and hearts and minds of your customers, you're going to know how to deliver this content to them, because you're going to understand what they consume already, right? So there's an opportunity if you really take time to get to know your customers about where they're going to consume your content best. And as a B2B person, I know that we struggle with trying new formats, because like the idea of starting with TikTok for a corporate company, like that's, if you do it badly, it sucks. And if you do it really well, it's magic. And there's not a lot of middle ground there. You're really looking at, you have to commit and you have to invest and you have to experiment. And I think that goes for video or interactive PDFs or quizzes, or however you go about this. You have to really understand, how your customers are interacting with your content, so that you can provide them with both the method of delivery as well as the content that's going to vibe with them the best. I'm trying to think of some other things. We got the polls, we have quizzes. interactive PDFs.
I have one. Case
Yeah.
studies that are actually told from the customer's point of view. And I mention that because I've written probably several hundred case studies, and it's always like I said something magical or handed somebody a pot of gold at a rainbow when I give them a draft of a case study that is the customer telling their story, and it's about the customer's
Oh,
journey, and it's in their own words. It's not me, the writer, summarizing everything that the customer said. It is literally the story. We've shaped the narrative, but the story from the customer's words. Because
yeah.
wouldn't that make you so much more likely to invest your money in a solution, especially on the B2B side, when you hear
Yeah.
from a customer what their real experience was like versus hearing a marketer using the marketing brand messaging to
Yeah.
explain how you were so great, and then having just at the end the one obligatory quote from the customer about how great you are. We're so sick of those case studies. They're so lame.
Yeah. And when you think about that as an interactive, an interactive piece of content, is the interaction really just engaging from the customer's perspective? Is that the idea that you work so closely with the customer? It's sort of interactive on a one-to-one perspective. Is that what you're
Yeah, and
thinking?
usually you're doing those interviews by video, so you can have that video of them actually saying those things. So you can
Yeah.
see that when you ask them to kind of sum up their experience, that they got that little tear in their eye when they say, "Oh, I love, your brand. It just really it changed my work experience." And their voice quivers and you're like, "Yes." Like that to me is so impactful, right? And you don't get that
Yes.
from this boring case study where you summarized everything.
So true. So true. Um, my kiddo's homesick with me today, so we're having a slight dialogue. As we go here, it's kind of part. You got your dog on your lap. I've got my kid in my living room, so it's good times.
It is the first Monday after the daylight savings time change here on the West
Yeah,
Coast. So it's a little tough.
yeah, yeah.
So I
Yes,
want to share this
absolutely.
quote from Wendy Kramer before we go into our next topic that I wanted to cover. And Wendy was part of Maureen's team at the agency and noted, being
Yeah.
lighthearted helps us not take ourselves too seriously, which often feels so much more genuine to the end reader. And oh my gosh, that is just so true. Because
Yep. Yes, we used humor as a way to connect with our people all the time. I mean, it's such a relief to laugh when you're reading somebody's content. It's such a moment of, oh, wow, you get me. And to be vulnerable, like be to help a reader be vulnerable enough to laugh in that space is also a pretty incredible opportunity. I don't think we get very often as marketers, but it also is the thing that creates that human connection, which creates those memorable and remarkable moments. So Wendy was always one. She came up with some incredible ideas. So did Diana Cadet. I know you've had her on Content Chat.
yep.
She is both hysterical and brilliant. Jess Scenarius, she's been around. She's also brilliant, and we got to actually leverage her psychic. She's a psychic consultant. We actually got to use that in our Zodiac campaign, and it was just we did cheesy videos where I literally was like off screen handing her silly flamingos that had a paper clip with the horoscope on it every month. I mean, it was ridiculous. And we leaned into that cheese because we didn't have the budget to make these big fancy expensive videos. We didn't feel like it was going to be a stumbling block though, because the whole thing was just lighthearted and cheesy, as Wendy said. And so I think when you don't try to do something that if you're really genuine and you're not trying to like hide behind production value, you can get away with a lot. There's a lot of opportunity to experiment and play, really baseline play, right? Because that's where you're going to get the magic.
And that's the result of having this amazing team. But for those folks out there
Yeah.
who are listening enviously as you're talking about all this,
Yeah.
how do you foster a creative and diverse team to really, have this kind of innovative content ideation? How do you create that safe space too?
Well, I can tell you how I did it in my team. Like I was very real with my team always. Like I was the person you see today is actually who I am. This is genuine. I mean, you can speak, Erica, you can speak to that. Like I'm pretty much the same person in most
It's
situations.
true.
So I,
You're always
I
you.
yeah, and I find it's important to be funny and open and honest and vulnerable, and that is how I brought that to my team, and making it a safe space for ideas. We never it wasn't always like no unless it was like wildly inappropriate, and they'd be like, girls, no, I'm sorry, but no, we can't play like that, you know. But saying yes to things that were surprising or unusual, or let's think that out, let's use that as a thought experiment, and making that safe. We were able to really have some. I will say that in every single meeting, we had somebody being like, "I've had a hard week," and there might be a tear, you know what I mean, or three or five, and that was just creating that level of the ability to be vulnerable in that space means that there was the ability to be vulnerable for ideas and experimentation and risk taking. And since I was the leader, I could say yes, right? I could say yes to trying new things. Um, and I know something we're going to talk about in a little bit is like what kind of advice are we going to talk through, right? And I want to talk about that because Diana and I, when we were at Content Marketing World last year, we actually talked about risk and how to work with leadership. So that way, if you aren't the leader that gets to make the decision, how do you work with those folks to help them, build that.
Well, let's just go there now. Let's talk about it now.
Okay, sorry. I jumped ahead, but I
It's all
got
right. It's
excited.
all right. Let's just go with the flow.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that when you are working, fostering the creative teams is all about building space for vulnerability for your team members, right? It's creating a safe space, not just in your idea sessions. That vulnerability needs to start with the minute that you start working with them and show them that you're on their team. And if you're working with clients or customers, that you have their back and you're there for them. You really have to remove blockers to build out that sort of collaborative, um, vulnerable making trust that is so critical. And by doing that, like the hard part is creativity is risky, right? Like creativity is where you're being vulnerable, you're sharing an idea that's unexpected, and if you don't create an environment that welcomes that and that they understand that they're safe, even if that idea is stupid or if it doesn't work out or whatever, like you're just not going to get the same level of innovation and novelty and remarkability as if you were able to create that kind of a space. And so, to the next section where we were talking about advice, oftentimes we as marketers are not the leaders that get to make these decisions. And when we're in that space, we oftentimes have to focus on ROI. And I don't think that's actually a bad thing, really, right? I mean, if you can set up a test and measure environment for your leadership space and a trust environment on, from a team perspective, you're going to get creativity pushing up, and you're going to get measurement, the ability to test and measure new concepts from the top down, right? Because you're saying, I am experimenting to ensure that we are growing our revenue and we're not going to sit stagnant. I am experimenting with different concepts and different ideas, and building out this opportunity for us to leverage new ideas and make sure that we're you know getting new insights and gleaning information from our customers in new ways. And you can use that very professional, very you know down brass tacks conversation to foster the ability to be creative. That's the magic, right? So like you have, as a leader that's living in between those two spaces, you have to make sure that you have ROI goals, because that's critical to what we do as marketing leaders. But
Yep.
you also have to have new ideas, and that's critical to being able to build out campaigns that get results. And so when I think about that from a from an advice standpoint, I think that the thing is making sure that you have both ends of that spectrum covered so that you can have conversations with everybody at each level of your organization, um, to continue to be able to experiment and grow.
And I think as a leader, you also have to be able to identify what those obstacles are in your organization and how to get them out of the way. And
Yep.
for example, if you have all of your people stuck in meetings 8 hours a day back to back,
Oh
they're not
no.
going to be able to be creative or innovative. And similarly, if you don't take time to, take people offsite, even if it's just down the street, to,
Yep.
have nachos and, margaritas and bond and come up with crazy ideas, if the idea generating session is everyone sitting at their desks remotely all the time, squeezing into one of those meetings, you're
Yeah.
just not going to get the same energy or innovation, because when did they have time to like smell some fresh air or, read something funny? Because I've been
Well,
in those situations, where you don't even
yep.
get lunch and you're in person at the work site and you're going from meeting to meeting, and then people are grouchy that you brought your lunch to a meeting. And you're like, when am I supposed to eat?
Yeah, it's true. I will say though, and it's interesting. Once again, innovation is that cross section between and between different things that may be disparate, right? But burnout is the antithesis of innovation.
Yeah.
Burnout is the antithesis of creativity. It will literally squash any tiny flame you might have in your team. So I would say that my last employer did a no meeting Friday, and I think that was really brilliant. It was a great way to create a
Yep.
little space to work, create a little space to think. I would encourage people to take that on. I think that was really smart. I also find that like honestly, the majority of the work that we did that was creative was all virtual, but we had space to think and we had space to breathe and experiment and laugh. Like the majority of our meetings, we made them an hour, probably could have finished them in 30 minutes, but so much of it was us connecting and having having fun together. And even if that's a virtual,
Yep.
margarita and nachos conversation, it's still valuable to take that time and enjoy each other. Remember that you're human beings too, and that
Exactly.
and be at the heart of being a human means that you can be an exceptional marketer if you take the time to connect with each other, understand your customer, experiment, find ways to be creative, get excited about what you're doing. Because boring content is boring for everybody. It's boring for the marketers and it's boring for the consumers. So
I love that. But since you brought up burnout, let's go there. Let's talk about it, because you
talk about it.
did a really delicious content campaign around burnout. It was a really neat, engaging, and interactive um, content program. And I'd love for you to share a little bit with everybody, so that way maybe you can inspire folks, because it was definitely very timely content.
Yeah, it was like right after COVID and we were all exhausted. And it was the question it was for marketers. It was at my agency. And the first thing we did was it was a quiz. How burned out are you? It wasn't even, are you burned out? It was, how burned out are you? And the whole visual theme was toast. And so it was a varying toast, like burnt toast scale, which was very funny. I worked the team. Diana fine tuned it and polished it, but we took the survey of these funny, cute, like these questions of this actually relatively serious topic about burnout, of like where you are in the scale of things and how you're doing as marketers, and found out that like over 60% were so burned out that they like could barely like breathe. And we intersected that with some humor and some lightness, and generated an interactive ebook that allowed us to sort of show everybody that they're not alone, and that the best thing you can do is leverage your resources. And we were a resource. And then we also took that foundational concept and turned it into a content marketing world talk, and we're able to actually interact with a bunch of burned out marketers. In fact, there were tears on that one. Somebody in the front row actually started to cry because I was like, I told my burnout story, right? My burnout story about my daughter having some chronic anxiety stuff, and I was trying to balance owning several businesses, and being a marketer and a mom and a wife and all these things. And so I made people cry in my content marketing world session, but it was so poignant, right? It's the human connection element. It's about combining something that everybody understands or that's ubiquitous or at least common amongst your market, combining that with something that gets their attention from maybe a visual standpoint or the way your language is structured, and intertwining that with personal stories. I mean, that's where that intersection is a winning intersection of things. That's a combination or a recipe for success when it comes to this type of content. And if you're feeling burned out as a marketer right now, the antidote to burnout is creativity, and the way that burnout is the antithesis of creativity. So if you can find a way to give yourself time and space to experiment and think and dream, right? It's about dreaming. Ultimately, I think people underestimate how valuable that is for the business, right? Literally within 6 months, you could see something turn into money for an organization if you give people the space to dream and think and laugh and grow. Um, I think the one final example that I just have on this particular topic is at the last organization I was working at, they I actually gave a mini version of my joy-based marketing talk, which I gave at Content Marketing World. Yes, last year. It was about how having more fun makes money. So uh, I did that with Diana Cadet as well. It was a great talk. We had a lot of fun. It was beautiful. But I had given my team like a mini version of my talk, and they were inspired. It was so cool. So they went out and actually experimented with a couple of different campaigns and saw some really impressive results. And so I just think it goes to show that fun really can make money, and we need to just make sure that we have the measurement in place to be able to see how it's impacting us and make sure that we're giving us or how it's impacting the bottom line, while also giving space for sorry, kid sick, while also giving people space to experiment and think and dream. So
I love that, and I think that's a good spot for us to open the floor to Q&A. So if you have any questions for Maureen or I about how to come up with some great ideas, or frankly, if you're struggling with something you're working on and you need a fresh idea and you want to do some real-time brainstorming, I'm up for it. And I know Maureen's always up for this kind of thing. So feel free to leave us a comment here right
yeah,
now. If you're watching, unfortunately, if you're watching this on the recap, we cannot in real time do the brainstorming with you.
yeah.
Sorry about that. This is a one-time live offer only. So for those of you who are listening live on LinkedIn, if you need help, this is your opportunity to ask. And let me see. Why don't we, Maureen, is there something you're working on that I can help you brainstorm with to get people excited and started?
Okay, so I'm relaunching my consulting business, which is
Yes.
really exciting. I really committed to it about a couple weeks ago. So I've been really working on my own projects, my own program. So one of the things that I was brainstorming with somebody was the idea of almost like for small and medium businesses, the idea that a lot of people aren't ready for a marketer when they know that they need stuff, but they don't know how to do the next steps. And so I'll come to them and be like, do you know who your market is, right? And they don't know who that is. So I was considering this idea of almost like a micro or like a nurture that allowed people to sort of answer questions to help them build up that bevy of information they need to work with a marketer in a very efficient way. So the inspiration for this was Storyworth. Have you heard of this product?
Mm-mm.
So it's great. It's like a
Oh, is it
Christmas
the box
present.
that gets people to write their like life story?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but what if you took this concept of Storyworth where somebody's like telling their life story one bite at a time, but you apply it to business,
I love
right?
that.
So fascinating. So, this idea that you can help build out somebody's baseline marketing needs so that they can work with a marketer to take their business to the next step. Because, as much as they know they need a website, who are they talking to on that website? That's a real struggle for small business.
Yeah.
And what do they want their brand to feel like? And what is the content that, what's their story?
So basically,
And
you're building a marketing incubator. the same way that there's startup incubators.
Yeah, but like a nurture via
Yeah.
nurture, like email nurture. So I'm thinking that, thanks, Anne. I'm thinking like you double click on it and it'll take you to it'll take you to like a mini survey, and the survey generates like an answer for you and will send you the results. And at the end of the nurture, you actually send them, like my only part in this is at like the end of an 8-week nurture or something like
Yeah.
that. I put together everything and I give it to them in one document, and I maybe we run it through, a chat GPT and do a few edits here and there so that it's really useful to them.
Yeah.
So, and I was just trying to think of ways where I can get my small business clients, because I work for a lot of variety of different people, right? I work for mom and pop shops, and then I work for a lot of companies who've been in business for a long time, but haven't really done a lot of active marketing, and then go from that to also some larger B2B companies, right? Where we're talking enterprise level. So it's always so it's just trying to take all of these people and get them where they need to be so that they're ready for somebody like me. And so I'm just thinking, like, what are some types here? I think the brainstorming part of this that might be kind of fun would be to ask, like, what are some of the types of questions that might be interesting to ask these people as we build up from a general marketing perspective, because they're not even at content yet, right? Like content is going to end up being part of it, but you have to do this foundational marketing stuff to actually generate the kind of content that you want. So maybe
Yeah.
we can talk about that. That might be interesting.
Okay. To me, like one of the first questions I'd want to ask them is, why did you start your business? So if you're talking to an
Mm-hmm.
SMB audience, why did you start your business? Where you
Mm-hmm.
unpack, was it because they had a passion for the industry or the particular products and services? Was it because they needed the flexibility and freedom of being a small business owner? So, kind of putting it out there and just starting with understanding what attracted them to their business, or was
Yeah.
it like a legacy? Was it that this was the family business? And because I feel like you kind of need to understand that first to have the context for then, how they're going to want to approach things, because
Yep.
all of those are very different situations. And to me, you're going to have very different kind of outcomes at the end based on how you ask that or answer
Yep.
that rather. And,
Yep.
you're getting some affirmation here from Anne too, because
Yeah.
nonprofits, similar to SMBs, they need a lot of guidance. They need help figuring out a lot of marketing stuff, but frequently they can't afford to hire an agency. They can't afford to hire an experienced marketer. They have a tendency to hire a practitioner who's tired of being a practitioner, or they
Yep.
hire in, somebody who's just starting out in their career. I know because I've been that person at
Mm-hmm.
a membership association with just a few years of marketing experience under my belt owning, marketing. And you learn as you go, but they have those same kind of needs. And it's like, well, just start with what drew you in. So I kind of
Yeah.
like to start with that.
I love that. And I think that it gives you a real starting point for a conversation that I like to have with my clients is who are your most valuable customers? Who are your
Hmm.
most strategic customers? And who do you just enjoy working with the most, right? Because those could be 3 different audiences. They could
Yeah.
be one audience. They could be 2 audiences, but
And
like,
unpacking the why again. It's like, why are they
right.
the most enjoyable? Because then that's when you figure out is, what kind of content someone's really going to like doing.
Yeah.
Because, they may be more interested in doing really customized one-on-one kinds of content
Right.
versus, some people might want to go out and be doing public speaking as a content avenue,
Yep.
whereas other people might be like, I would never in a million years want to go out and do public speaking. And I feel like you can uncover a lot of that by asking these questions and
For
then
sure.
really create, a great response for them.
Yeah, and I like the idea of talking to them about their most strategic customers too. When I think about a strategic customer, I think about the one that's going to help them grow over time.
Yeah.
Like the kind of partnerships you may be using, you might be starting out with like a loss leader to start, but long term, they are the people that you want to work with or will grow your business the fastest. That happens a lot with referral partners. Like you
Mhm.
may not be able to make a lot of money off your referral partner, but you may be able to um, you may be able to nurture people like that in your network, and they will therefore send you business back. And therefore that's the hard part, is like they're the ones you make the most money off of necessarily directly,
Right.
but they are strategic alliances that are going to help you build your business in a really efficient way.
Yeah.
So I love thinking about that too. That's a fun one.
No, that's super smart because, just thinking about my own business, there are, sometimes you'll be like, wow, I don't have experience in this area, but I'm going to learn so much. And it's going to open up a whole new avenue for my business by, investing in taking the time to learn about this industry and to do some things that are outside of our everyday. So, definitely, I definitely relate to that kind of standpoint. Folks are being shy, so it looks like nobody wanted our live brainstorming. I am sad, but maybe we should have a future one where that's the entire thing. We'll do a brainstorm, because I think the collective ideation that happens when you bring together a bunch of smart marketers
Yep.
who don't do the same work every day, don't have the same clients. I feel like that can be really impactful, and maybe we'll do that at Content Marketing World, get everybody together and do a live brainstorm. I think that
I
could
was
be
thinking
fun.
about I was thinking about starting up like a tea time for marketers, like sitting down and actually like having a afternoon cup of whatever and like hanging out and like actually brainstorming how to make our content better, how to make our marketing more interesting. I think that could be very effective. Maybe we could do a live version.
Let's
Maybe
do
we should
it.
just, it'd be fun, right? Like
Let's do it. You
we can
better
make
invite me.
fasteners.
I better be a co-host.
Of course you're going to be a co-host. Get out of here. I want
Excellent.
to make fasteners and I want to have a teacup. I want to have a whole situation.
Fantastic. I probably actually have a fascinator up there in one of those hat boxes on top of my bookcase.
Yeah.
See, folks, you just saw an idea was just born right here. Oh, and we have our first guest who says that
That's
she
right.
is excited to go. Whoop, whoop, whoop,
Let's do
whoop.
it. Let's
All
have some
right.
tea.
You heard it here first.
That's
Well,
this has
oh
been
my goodness.
so fun. Thanks for having me.
This has been a blast, and I feel like this will help people unlock their brains and maybe get over some ideation frustration where they're just like, I can't come up with a new idea. I'm so bored with what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I'm thinking that we may have helped folks with that.
I hope so. I think that the real key is not to be afraid to get weird.
Be your weird Barbie self. If
Yeah.
you don't
Be
know what
weird
I'm talking
Barbie.
about, go watch Barbie. Thank you. You're welcome
100%.
also.
Thank you. You're welcome. Thank you.
So, Maureen, for folks who want to hear more from you on a regular basis, where can people actually find you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out if you want to brainstorm. I actually offer 30 minutes to like just shoot the breeze and learn more about each other. That's definitely a core piece of my business. Once again, human connection. But if like you want to brainstorm in that 30 minutes, that's fine. Let's do it. Let's have some fun. But you can also find me at maureenjann.com. I have it right here under my name. I'm building out some really interesting programs, so keep an eye on that spot. So between the SMB nurture, talking about the tea time, that's been on my mind as well. So like some really fun things. Also thinking about how to turn marketing services like ours into subscriptions for people at all price points. So that's been some interesting things. So yeah, go check out my website. I've got some case studies. I'm working on a blog. It's going to be good stuff.
I love it. And note all of the various and sundry things we mentioned with Maureen's campaigns, etc. We'll have all of those links in the recap on the blog probably by the end of the week. So you can check them all out there and get even more inspiration. So
That's right.
much inspiration. Thank you so much for being our guest today, Maureen. And thanks to everybody who was watching this live. Those of you watching the recap, you can still leave us questions either on the blog post or on LinkedIn, because you'll be seeing this this archive for the next couple of weeks on LinkedIn as well. So thanks, everybody, and we'll catch you again next week. Bye, guys.
All right. Thank you.